Welcome. We're glad you're here. My name is Eric White. I'm the Adult Services Librarian here at the library. Hey, thank you. Thank you. We are excited to have Sibyl Gardner with us this evening to talk about her writing journey from TV writing in Hollywood to screenwriting to memoir and novel writing. Before I introduce Sibyl, I'll give our standard library disclaimer. The library sees part of its job as bringing in speakers to share their own perspectives for the enrichment of the community. Speakers' perspectives are purely their own. We don't tell them what to say, and we don't think you'd want us to. All right. Now I would like to introduce our honored guest. Working in television for more than 3 decades, Sibyl started as an intern on TV shows during college, then worked at fledgling MTV and various cable TV shows in New York. Moving from production to screenwriting, she pursued a career in Los Angeles that included writing for numerous one-hour dramas, from Law and Order in its early years to most recently the country music drama Nashville. She's also taught writing and consulted on many projects. Her latest project is a 2024 memoir titled Sibyl Writes: How a Lefty New Age Hollywood Party Girl Quit Drinking, Found God, and Escaped to Colorado. Please welcome Sibyl Gardner.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming. The other night, I wanted to be entertained and was looking for a movie and found on Netflix an old movie with one of my favorite actresses, Kristen Wiig. And it was a comedy, supposedly a comedy, called Welcome to Me. And it was about a crazy woman who wins $87 million in the lottery and decides that she wants to have a talk show that's all about her. And so I thought, that's not what I want to do today, is make this all about me. It's, about my experience in the entertainment industry, but it's broad. I want to just let people know what it's like and what it was like when I arrived in Los Angeles in 1988, and what things are like for writers now, because it's vastly different. And I am incredibly lucky that I got to have my career there when I did. How I got there was I was working at MTV in New York back in the 80s. And then I started working for a music video production company and traveling around and doing music videos for people like Tom Petty and Carly Simon and a lot of famous rock and roll people. But then my company went bankrupt. And so I was hostessing at a fancy restaurant in Tribeca, where I lived in Manhattan. And a friend of mine convinced me that I should write her idea as a screenplay. And I had gone to college as an English major, but I never had any film experience. And so I took a class at the 92nd Street YMCA. That's my entire screenwriting training. And I wrote this screenplay, which was, of course, terrible, but I fell in love with screenwriting and decided that I wanted to move to LA and make movies. So that's how it started. So I moved in 1988 with 2 suitcases and this crummy screenplay. And I had to get a job because I had no money. And so the advantage I had in 1988, and I'm going to really talk about how technology has impacted the whole of the entertainment industry from that time forward. So the advantage I had back then was I knew how to use computers and do word processing and Excel and budgets and stuff. And so I got a job on a TV show as an assistant to a producer, because I could, it was a show that, does anyone know Hugh Wilson? He was a big writer, producer. He did that show, WKRP of Cincinnati, and just many, many comedies. So this was an amazing show with an all-black cast called Frank's Place. And it was going into its 2nd season, but CBS canceled it right before we started production. But it was on the Universal Studios movie lot, which was the most exciting place I ever worked. And the production company was Viacom. And back then, Viacom had 6 TV shows in production. And so they just moved me from one show to another. But at that point, I didn't care about television. I wanted to make movies. And so working on all these different TV shows that they produced was just a way to make a living. But it was still fun because I got to have a golf cart and drive all around the Universal Studios lot and see Jaws and see Hitchcock's Office, because I was a big Hitchcock movie fan. But in 1988, and here's part of how things have changed dramatically, the landscape was that the prestige was in movies. Television was like the ugly stepchild, because the shows that were on were, like Matlock, and, not that there's anything wrong with that, but there was not really much glamour in television. Everyone wanted to write movies, and including me. But because I was working at Viacom, which had all these TV shows on the air, I started watching TV for the first time in a while, because before that I just, watched MTV where I worked. And I fell in love with sitcoms. And so I decided I'm going to be a sitcom writer. So I wrote what they call is a spec script. So you would get to know a show really well, and then you would come up with your own storyline and write the script. And that would show people that you could understand story structure and characters, and that you'd be a good writer. So that was my goal for like 5 minutes. But then I decided, no, I really want to do movies. So then I wrote a comedy movie, and nothing happened with it. People would read it. I was, constantly tugging on, shirt sleeves, shirt tails. Can you read my script? Can you read my script? And I got good feedback, so I kept going. And then the turning point came when I became a production coordinator, and I had my own office, and it was right across the courtyard from Dick Wolf Films. And you probably recognize Dick Wolf's name because he's a billionaire now, from creating Law and Order and all these different TV shows. And I got to know a couple of writers that were working on this new show that hadn't premiered yet, called Law and Order. And I asked one of the writers if I could read his script, and he said, sure. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is so good. This is like heads and tails better than Jake and the Fat Man, which I was working on as a writer's assistant. And I had a lot of gall, I guess, because I gave him some notes on his script, which, was really nervy. But he was like, oh, wow, do you want to be my assistant? So that's how I ended up leaving Viacom and getting a job at Dick Wolf Films, and was a writer's assistant on Law and Order for 3 years. So one of the things that I want to bring into the picture is how important relationships are in the entertainment industry, and probably in every industry. But there were really 3 people who became mentors to me. And I'm, 35, 40 years later, whatever, they're still friends of mine. So I was on Law and Order, still wanting to write comedies, and yet here I had this opportunity to pitch ideas, because one of my jobs was to read the New York Times, to read the New York Post, to try to get story ideas to just, pester the writers with. And eventually they bought one of my ideas, and they didn't produce that episode, but I spent like 6 months doing research on Haiti, because it was about the topic of diplomatic immunity. And so I really got to understand that, and I wrote this whole story, and I sold my first story. And then I came to Colorado, because I always knew I was going to end up in Colorado. And and at that point, I was thinking, I'm going to buy a little house so I can retire here. And that comes like 30 years later when that actually happened. But in the meantime, they let me pitch other ideas to Law and Order, and that's how I got my start. So I co-wrote an episode with Michael Chernichin, whose name will come up later in this talk. And then they said, you can either come on staff as a staff writer, or you can just write your own episode, and that way you'll be able to get an agent. Because if you co-write with somebody, you can't get an agent, because they don't know which is your part. So I said, I'll take, door number B and write my own episode. And it became a big hit. In fact, they ended up taking that storyline in England, the British version of Law and Order, and renaming it. And now that airs in England, and I get residuals for, things that aired in England now. So I went, at that point, having had a couple of episodes of television produced, I realized I can get an agent. So I started interviewing different agents, and I would say to them, well, I want to write movies and sitcoms and dramas. And they were like, yeah, you're a 1 hour drama writer. You're a woman who can write with edge, and that's how we're selling you. So there's this pigeonhole. You can't, back then at that time period, that was the early 90s. That's what they sold me as, a woman who could write, crime dramas and stuff. And so I started on this wheel. Like, my idea was that I was going to, write an episode here and there, and then write a movie, and then do this, and then travel the world. But what I didn't realize at that time was the agenda that the business has for writers, so that they profit off of your work. And so what I wrote down over here is to give you an idea of how things worked back then when you were a television writer. So Eric, can I walk over there, or do you want me to stay here? I can just point.
I would say for the recording, let's just point.
Just point, okay. So on the far left side, that is how things worked and still pretty much work in television. You start out as a freelance writer. That's sort of the low man on the totem pole. You don't have any rights. You just come in and pitch ideas, and they hire you. Then if you get hired onto a television staff, you become a staff writer. Then it's a ladder that you climb up. So every year or every show you work on, you hope that you can elevate to the next level. And what everybody wants is to create their own show. So that became my goal. I want to get a show on the air and get it created by. I got as far, I forgot one level. After producer, there's a level that's supervising producer. So that's how far I got when I left Hollywood. What changed is technology changed everything, because when I got there in '88, there was ABC, CBS, NBC, and then Fox had just started producing dramas, and they had the Tracy Ullman Show and a couple other things. So that affected content in that networks had to appeal to a very broad audience. So Matlock, there's nothing edgy about that show. But then when cable television started, they could be more narrow casting to, and get a little edgier, because they weren't trying to capture the entire country in an audience. So cable TV came next after broadcast television. Then came HBO, which back then did even edgier things. Then came streaming, which is how a lot of people watch television now. That would be Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime. Also, there's content being made now on YouTube, so that any kid in America can make a TV show and just put it up on their YouTube channel, or TikTok, and that's very short, things. Now, the way that has impacted writers in not such a great way is that when shows aired on broadcast television, you had to join the Writers Guild. And they have minimums for what you write. So, for example, when I went back then, I think the minimum for writing an episode of Law and Order on a network show was on NBC was probably about $27,000, $28,000. So if you were on staff, you would get a salary, a weekly salary, or an episode salary. Plus, if you wrote an episode, you would get that chunk of $27,000. Now I think it's about $40,000 for an episode on a network show. The amazing part about that was that in the Writers Guild contract, you would get residuals when that episode repeated. And so say I made $30,000 on a Law and Order episode. The first time it reran, I would get 60% of that. The next time I'd get 50%. And then there's foreign residuals, there's syndication. And so that helped writers sustain their careers, because they would write a couple of episodes and they might not get work for a year, but if they got residuals, they could stay afloat and keep writing. Now with streaming, the residuals are like $2. You know, they're practically nothing. And that's, you know, not a good thing. For things have changed dramatically. Another thing that's changed is the last show that I worked on was called Nashville. I did 3 episodes over 3 different seasons, and there were 12 writers on staff. That was also a network show. And they did 22 episodes. So that was the normal order of a show, was 22 episodes. And so writers could kind of predict their life because there was a season. So you would start writing in like July. You would have 22 episodes. It would end in about April. Then you'd have a couple of months off. Nowadays, with streaming, there might only be 6 episodes, and then they might take a year to decide if they want to bring that show back. And so writers are scrambling, and my writer friends who are still in Hollywood are saying it's now a gig economy, and you have to have a lot of things going at the same time. So back to the idea of relationships, when I was writing for Law and Order, there were really not many women who wrote that kind of drama. Most women wrote really soft soap opera kind of things or sitcoms. And so a woman came and wrote a freelance episode of Law and Order before I had a chance to write there, and her name's Nancy Miller. And she happened to live in the same area of Los Angeles as I lived in. And I asked her if I could take her for coffee, and she ended up becoming a mentor to me, and she would read every script I wrote and said, you know, when I get a chance to hire you, I'm going to hire you, which she did. And she created 4 different TV shows, and I worked on 2 of them, and she tried to get me on a 3rd one, but then the show I was working on was really angry at her, so they kind of blackmailed her. And there's a lot of politics and everything, right? And even in television, especially. But she's still one of my best friends. And so I worked on the last show that she did that I worked on was called Saving Grace. And it was really a great show. So the other mentor that I have is another writer from Law and Order, and he's now writing novels. And so the title of this talk is From Screen to Page and Back Again. And so I'm going to get into the difference between screenwriting and novel writing, or any kind of prose, short stories, etc. And when I say screenwriting, it used to really be refer to movies. But now screenwriting, because screens are like anything is a screen, and people watch television, you know, on their phones sometimes. Now screenwriting is just television, movies, whatever. I am going to ask Duke to bring me my purse, if you would, because I have a couple of notes in there that I wanted to bring out. Thank you. Oh, you know what? They're right behind that box on those index cards. Thank you. So one of the things that is really, thank you so much. One of the things that's really specific in Hollywood about work is that you're always working, but you're only getting paid sometimes. So I put up on there imdb.com. That is the website for internetmoviedatabase.com. So if you look at that, say you want to know what other movies was Kristen Wiig in, you would just type Kristen Wiig and it would give you all her credits, her biography, etc. So if you put my name in there, excuse me, it would give you all of the TV shows that I wrote that were produced. And yet, that's only a third of it. I've written 12 movie scripts. I've written about 8 or 9 TV pilots that are original ideas. And it's not for naught in that those writing samples always got me jobs on other shows. So I would write a movie script thinking, oh, I want to make this movie. And someone would read it and be like, oh, I'll give you a job on my TV show. So, you know, and I still own the copyrights to all of those scripts. So people often ask me if I'm retired, and I have to say, I really don't know, because I'm still writing and I'm still trying to get things off the ground. Um, so the problem though is when I go into the library, because I read a lot, when I go into the library and see somebody like Tammy Hoag, who's written, 12 mystery novels, I think, oh man, I wasted my life writing all these scripts that are just sitting on my shelf, and nobody wants to read one of my scripts. And yet, my mentor, Nancy, always says, yes, but they made you a better writer. And I'm still writing. So what I'm doing now is I had this idea, and this gets into my personal story a little bit, in that I had my first child at 41. And I started realizing that there was a trend among many career women to delay childbirth. And so I knew in Los Angeles a bunch of women who had kids in their 40s. And I got this idea for a movie called Old Moms. And it's about these three women who hated each other in high school, but they meet up again at the funeral of one of their high school teachers. And now they're all 42 years old and they all have babies. And they still can't stand each other, but they end up finding out that they really need each other. So I started writing this movie and developing the characters. And then I thought, oh, yeah, but I'm going to do it as a TV pilot. It's less, I won't have to work as hard or something. So then I made it started writing it as a TV show. But then I thought, yeah, but what happens, over 6 seasons? Like, what happens with these little babies? It's really expensive to shoot with babies, by the way, or animals. And so that's another thing about being a writer in Hollywood is you think about production and how much things are going to cost. So once I moved to Colorado, I thought, nope, I'm writing this as a novel, and it's going to be my practice novel. Well, after spending decades writing scripts, I realized, oh my gosh, this is a whole different Megillah. And so I'm going to read something from a script, and I'm going to read something from Hemingway's novel, The Sun Also Rises, just a little bit, just to show the craft or art, depending on how you view screenwriting, is completely different. Screenwriting is about economy. You have to get the most possible information across in the fewest words, whereas novel writing obviously is you have the freedom to just go on and on. You have the freedom to talk about the inner life of a character, the childhood of a character, and you can't do any of that with screenwriting unless it's visual writing. And so if you don't see it or hear it, you really can't use it. So the other thing about television and how it's evolved is that when TV shows first started, dramas, it was really taking plays, the format of a play, and putting it on television so that it could reach a broad audience. And then now it's evolved to the point where it's, you don't know if it's a movie or a television show because they're kind of shot in similar ways. But one of the things that happened from the time that I got there in 1988 until now is that everybody wants to be in TV. So I mentioned that in '88, TV was the Wicked Stepchild, and movies were where everyone wanted to write movies. It was the glamorous, the prestige, whereas television was like, oh, you're a TV writer. Well, what happened was when cable TV started, it started dawning on these writers who were stuck in what they called development hell. So you could go to a movie studio and sell your idea. Oh, it's about the Titanic and blah, blah, blah. And it could take 2 years of them, executives giving you notes and going back and forth, and then they could just scrap the project. In television, you write something, you shoot it, it's on television so that your mom, my mom's right there, so that your mom can tell all her friends, oh, my daughter's got a TV show. And then the money was so much better in television back then. Not now, but back then. I mean, people were making, a friend of mine, started working on ER and they gave her $1 million deal. And this was somebody that I had hired at one point as an assistant on a show. And she's still a friend of mine. And I called her before I was going to do this talk to just say, what's going on out there now? And, she's still slugging away. After all these decades, she's a very sought after showrunner. head writer, but she's never gotten the brass ring. She's tried to, get shows on the air many times. And it's just very different. So whereas Nashville had 12 writers on staff, now they're doing these mini rooms. So you might have 3 writers writing all these episodes. The other drag about it is that the way it used to work with television, it was very different from feature films. In feature films, the writer is like almost banished from the set. It's really a director's medium. Television was a writer's medium because you had to have that continuity over all those episodes. And the writers who had sat in the writer's room for all this time, they knew where the show had come from, where it was going. And so the directors in episodic television were just the hired hands. And as you climbed the ladder, you would get to produce the episode and go to the set. So when I was working on Nashville, I got to fly to Nashville, be on the set when the actors had problems, which they always do. You rewrite. You have to be a really fast writer if you're a television writer. So at one point, I was on a plane going to Nashville from LA, and I had not come up with a story idea. The other writers had, but I had executed this idea. And right before I got on the plane, the star of the show said, "I'm not doing this. This is terrible. I'm not doing this story." And I had to rewrite a whole episode on a plane flight. So, it's not an easy job. But I loved it. I love being on a set. And so right now, because I know I don't want to talk for too long, but so what's happening right now is I have a television pilot that I wrote years ago that I decided was really good. And I called my old mentor from Law and Order, who's still a friend of mine, Michael Chernich, and you've probably seen his credits a million times, although nobody cares about the writers. It's always like, well, who's in that? Who's the actors? The writers are really, like, there would be nothing without the writers. What actors are not going to come up with stuff on their own. So I called him and I said, I have this script, here's what it's about, and would you read it? So he agreed to read it, and then he texted me, "It's great, I love it." And so we'll see. He's still in Hollywood. Still, we have the same agent, although my agent's kind of not really my agent anymore, but kind of it. I don't know. If they can smell money, they're your agent. So so something could happen with that. And then when I moved to Colorado 11 years ago, I thought, well, now's my chance to make independent movies. And I always wanted to do comedies because I was always a drama writer, but then my movies were usually comedies. So I wrote a couple of movies that are set in Colorado. And one of them is a comedy that's set in Boulder called Bitter. And it's about a couple that meet on a blind date and bond over their resentment of their exes. And so they decide they're going to set these exes up as a mean joke, but then the exes fall for each other. And so they have to break up this happy couple. And it's pretty funny. And, I'm talking to a producer about possibly shooting that. I don't know how much of it could be shot in Colorado because our tax incentives aren't that great. And this producer likes to shoot in Canada because financially it just makes a lot of sense, but we could still do some exteriors in Boulder. So that may happen. I'm not sure. So if any of you know millionaires or billionaires, see me afterwards because I have a really good thing for them. And then I'm still writing that novel, Old Moms. And I have a couple of other novels that I've done research on and started. One is a time travel novel. Now, that desire to write novels is not because I think I'm going to get rich doing that, because that is not going to happen. It's because I can't stop writing because I'm a writer. I know a couple of people who have made a good living as writers. One of them is, I've met him before, and he's a friend of my best friend. His name is Brian Godawa, and he writes these like biblical mystery thriller kind of things. And he's got, a couple dozen books that he's written. I have to add, he doesn't have children like I do. So that is, probably why he can write so much. But he told my friend that he spends $25,000 a month on marketing. So anyway, my writing. Like I wrote a memoir just because my life's been a little crazy, um, and I did the thing you're supposed to do when you want to publish a book is that you write a query letter, you send it to agents, and then they are going to, bring it out to publishers. So I did a lot of research on query letters and researched what agents might be appropriate. And I sent out probably 30 query letters, and it was like, no, I didn't hear back from a lot of people. And I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to self-publish it. So it was really easy. All I had to do, well, writing it was really fun because I didn't have the constraints that I had with screenwriting or with novel writing. It's 89 essays. So most of my friends are writers, and so one of them told me about a woman in Boulder who is a designer. So she designed the whole interior because there's a real art to it. And then she let me use one of her watercolor paintings for the cover. And then I self-published it. And so it's fun because now I can give people my book, or, I make like $2 on it. So it's not about the money. It's just about doing more. And I write essays. So here's what I want to do as a little exercise before we open for Q&A. I want to just give you an idea of just what, and I'm going to let I'm going to let you pass around some scripts, but I'm going to grab one of them, and I'm just going to show you how difficult it is to try to get a lot of information across in a very concise way. So this is Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power. So if you've read the Lord of the Rings, it's like this thick. And so, oh, this is not the script. This is like a little memorabilia book. So you can look at that if you're into the whole Lord of the Rings thing. All right, so did anybody see the movie La La Land? It was a pretty good movie, I thought. I really enjoyed it. So fade in, a sun-blasted sky. We hear radios, one piece of music after another. We're exterior, 101 freeway, day. Cars are at a standstill. It's a horrific traffic jam, morning rush hour, sun beating down, asphalt shimmering in the heat. The blown out downtown LA skyline hovers in the distance. We drift past more cars, hear one snippet of audio after another. Blah, 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 blah. The driver is a young woman. She hums along to the riff on her radio, then starts singing. So the driver's a young woman. Like, we don't know where she comes from, where she was born, what she looks like, who she is, why she's there, and it's just so sparse. Now I'm going to read a little bit from the first page of The Sun Also Rises, and I'm going to tell you how hard it would be or impossible to put this in a screenplay. Chapter 1, Robert Cohn was once middleweight boxing champion of Princeton. Do not think that I'm very much impressed by that as a boxing title, but it meant a lot to Cohn. He cared nothing for boxing. In fact, he disliked it, but he learned it painfully and thoroughly to counteract the feeling of inferiority and shyness he had felt on being treated as a Jew at Princeton. There was a certain inner comfort in knowing he could knock down anybody who was snooty to him, although being very shy and a thoroughly nice boy, he never fought except in the gym. He was Spider Kelly's star pupil. Now, you couldn't get that information into a script. And so it's such a different form. And yet, one of the things that Hollywood has gotten really into is called IP. And IP stands for intellectual property. So Hollywood has basically bought up everything. And there's a really good TV show called The Studio about a movie studio that's kind of run out of ideas. And so they buy the IP for Kool-Aid. And they're going to do a movie about Mr. Kool-Aid. But that's like, it's a satire. And yet that's kind of what it's like. Because they are so scared about original ideas, they buy IP, intellectual property, and then turn that into movies and TV shows. So that's one of the goals that I have with writing my novel, Old Moms, even though it's just a practice novel, is that if it ends up being really fun and great, it would be a wonderful vehicle for 3 actresses, and somebody in Hollywood could buy it. Who knows? But heck, it's worth a try. So what I thought I would do now is pass around scripts. So anybody that is interested in, this is Sideways by Alexander Payne, and I have to say I had a blind date with him, that my mom set me up with him, and then this was before he became like a huge star in Hollywood. And what did I say, that he was immature or something, or I don't know. I blew it. Yeah, we didn't dance. We just went for coffee. But anyway, when my career was really in the pits, this is a funny quick story. So my career was like, it may sound like, oh, she had all these shows on the air, whatever. My career was like that. And there were many times where I just wanted to hang it all up and say, I am doing something else. And so in my memoir, I talk about all the different things that I almost did in leaving show business. And I was really discouraged one time, and I called my dad, and he said, well, why don't you call that guy that you went out with that time, who's now a big director? I'm like, Dad, it's just not done. And he said, I don't care what's done, just call him. And so I called Alexander Payne, and he was very nice and said, well, the reason I write is because I want to direct. So I write things so I can direct them. But he wasn't gonna hire me for anything, but he kind of gave me a little pep talk. So he's a decent guy. Anyway, I'm going to open it up for Q&A if anyone has questions. And then Duke, do you want to just see if anybody wants to look at any of the scripts?
All right. So for the Q&A part, because we're recording for posterity, I'm going to call on folks. So just hold your questions until I reach you with the mic, and that way we'll get the question in our recording. Yeah. Who's got questions?
That was fabulous. Do you encourage a young person to go into writing, to go into Hollywood, to go into TV or whatever, YouTube or whatever?
That is such an excellent question, because when I called my friend Dee Johnson, the one who's still there and who's very, very successful and got the $1 million deal at ER and stuff, I just said, gosh, it would be terrible to be starting now, because writers don't get to produce their episodes now and go to set. They're like dismissed after the scripts are written. They get less money. Production companies may make somebody do staff writer 5 times, whereas in my day, you'd go staff writer and then you'd climb up the ladder. And so my initial gut feeling was, oh, it's horrible now. People have to have a starting writer has to have a job, doing DoorDash or something at the same time. But her response was, yeah, but they don't know how good we had it back then. So, like I took one acting class in my life in college, and the professor said, don't do it acting unless there's nothing else that you can do. And I would say the same thing about writing. Like I still do it. I can't stop. I did have a couple other careers kind of at the same time, but I would give the same advice. If you have to do it, do it.
I have a naive question, but I know you can help me with it. Okay, Your Honor, or The Sopranos. Do the writers of the first script on the first day know what the ending is going to be?
No. That's it? No.
Feel free to elaborate.
Elaborate, please. Tell me more.
Well, shows are really different. So, for example, Law and Order, you kind of know what you're going to get. Every show is its own. It's not serialized. So a show like The Sopranos is serialized. So one episode builds on the previous one. And when a show finishes its season, usually It's okay. The writers often don't know if the show is going to get picked up for another season. And so a lot of times it's just once the show gets picked up, then they decide, well, the next season is going to be this. And the other part of another aspect to your question is how much control do writers have over the material? And they used to have a lot more control. And so when I was on Law and Order, my boss, Robert Palm, would give his friends who were like in the radio business or newspaper writers the opportunity to do an episode to see if they would be good at television writing. That could never happen today. Now there's so much bureaucracy, and so writers have to be on approved lists. So the only way I could write Nashville is that, I was on an approved list because I had had enough credits. The other thing is, when I left Hollywood, writers had a quote. So I won't tell you how much I was making because that's personal, but I had a quote of a certain amount of money per episode. So when I would get hired on a show like Saving Grace, my agent would say, well, this is her quote. And you have to, or they would raise it and negotiate. Nowadays, that's kind of out the window. And so writers are just not making the good money that they used to make. Unfortunately, the residuals are not as good. They don't get to produce. And that was one of my favorite parts because most writers actually hate actors, but I always had a lot of actors as friends and I liked actors and I liked going to the set and working with actors. There was one, when I was working on Nashville, they realized that the show was coming in under the time period. And so I had to invent a scene for this whole episode that I had written and write it right there. And it was like, became a joke because it was the hot chicken episode because I wrote an episode with a star and her boyfriend sitting eating hot chicken. And it didn't work because, I was writing it right there, but it was still fun. It's a challenge, and the actors often, they want to collaborate and
Yes, I'm Carol Holster, and I just happened to be at one of our local thrift stores, and I picked up the film. I saw the film flags, and I brought it home, and we were just handed this book, and I think, how fun. I've yet to see the film. I'm sure it's wonderful.
would you like to have the script? You can keep that if you want it. Not everybody, just Carol. Okay, good. Good.
And I have a granddaughter in Los Angeles she thought she just wanted to be a singer. She loves jazz singing. She went to UNC here and got her theater background there. And we're so proud of her because she went out there and she realized she just loves the work that people do to create this type of entertainment for us all that gives us good, good vibes.
Hopefully.
Carol?
She's directing now, writing and directing.
Cool.
Yes.
Thanks, Carol. Who else has got a question?
So the writers had a strike, I don't remember, is it 3-4 years ago? And I know AI was part of their issue. Did they get much? You're making it sound like they are still in poverty.
That is also a really great question because I didn't even get to that on my little chart of technology. That is one of the big questions hovering now. So there have been many strikes. So when I moved in '88, it was in the middle of a strike. In 2007, we struck. I was very involved in that as a strike captain. And that strike was about jurisdiction of the internet because the big companies, which keep consolidating and So for example, Apple TV, television and content is just like a little part of their business. Apple is computers and phones. Um, the same with Amazon. They do content, but it's just a small part of their business. It's not like Warner, the olden days when, Warner Brothers, that's what they did was they made movies. So AI is a big thorn in the side of the industry for both actors and writers. And there are going to be a lot of lawsuits, I'm sure, because the companies want to make as much money as they can. They don't care about the writers or the actors. And they're going to, throw a bunch of people's scripts in a computer and then, bust out something that is AI, and it would be hard to trace back whose original idea it was. So, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. And I wouldn't say that writers are living in poverty. Probably it's sort of like a lot of the country in that there's the middle class has really gotten hurt. So there's still the Shonda Rhimes who make millions and millions. And then there's the ones starting out who are just trying to cobble together a life. But the vast majority who are the more middle class writers, which was me, it's just harder to have, there's fewer opportunities for that now.
I'm a different kind of writer. I write primarily like news writing, but I'm fascinated by the difference in the style because, and when you read the introduction and it was so choppy about the, La La Land. It was like this. So the writer doesn't really provide like a lot of the detail of like the setting. Who develops that?
It really depends. So, as I said, with screenwriting, it's about economy. So a big chunk of brain power for me in writing is when I describe a character that comes, new character in a script. I try to describe that character in one sentence or two sentences that would give the reader a real picture of who that person is. I can't go into their childhood and their background and their, everything else, but you can tell a lot by a person by how they treat a waiter or, various other things. The scripts that I've handed out, those are like final shooting scripts. And so people already know who those characters are. That's why they probably don't describe the main characters other than say a young woman. But the direct in a film, because these are all movie scripts, the director would have a big part in casting and in talking to that actor and giving them, talking them through that character. And then actors then often will kind of create their own background for their characters, which really pisses writers off a lot of times because they're like, no, you didn't grow up in Cincinnati in the ghetto. You come from an Ivy League college, so you have to make sure that they know who that character is. We'll come back to you, Patty.
Hey there. So earlier you mentioned the streaming and some of these maybe short series or what we can see today. And you mentioned, could you elaborate on some of the variables as to why you may see 4 of these awesome shows and then don't see anything for a year? And could you maybe elaborate on some of the variables of why there's so much time between a series or if we ever see it again?
Yeah, there's what they call limited series. So there might just be like there was one called Sirens, and I think it had 3 seasons, but it was only like 10 episodes per season, and then you had to wait before it aired. Some of that could be that the actors, if there's only 6 episodes, and say an actor is going to be committed to doing a movie and then another show, and then they have to wait till all these different pieces are available again. Whereas in the olden days when it was 22 episodes, you knew what the schedule was. It started production, the writers started in July, production started in the fall, finished by April, hiatus for 2 months. And so there was a regular schedule, and it was all about, writers used to joke that it was really just about selling soap, because it was when the new cars came out that the shows would premiere, and they would have commercials to sell cars. And so TV shows were the vehicle for selling cars. Yeah. And so what I've just recently read is that they've decided that the limited series of like 6 episodes of this show is not financially viable because you can't amortize things. So for instance, if there's a show that has, like Nashville has 22 episodes, and you have some permanent sets, you amortize the costs for construction, art, whatever, over 22 episodes. If you only have 6 episodes, you're spending a lot more money on every episode. And so and then when you go to sell it and you only have 6 episodes, the company that owns it is not going to make very much money compared to Everybody Loves Raymond, where there's like 150 episodes. They're going to make bank on that. And so they're probably going to be going back to shows that have more episodes. Things are so cyclical, you know, so I don't think that formula is going to last. I think Patty had another question.
I'm still hung up about like the descriptive issues that you can do as a writer, especially like if you're writing a period piece. Like I'm just peeking through the Lincoln script, and I was thinking also about like one of the things I loved watching was Mad Men. Not because I loved the storyline necessarily. I was fascinated. My dad had sold advertising during that era. So, but the things that I loved, and I'm curious what the writer's role is in like setting the tone of that, like, that Betty has this kind of a shirt on, or smokes this kind of a cigarette, or, the wallpaper looks like this. Is that the writer doesn't do any of that?
Yeah, the show creator, what was his name? Matt, who created Mad Men. His name is escaping me right now. But and again, this is how it used to be. They would do a pilot, and the show creator would have a huge say in the tone, the dress, the accents, all of that. And then in that season where they would do pilot season, and then they would showcase all these pilots in New York, and then advertisers would come and watch, and they would then decide what shows they were going to pick up. So ABC might do 10 pilots of drama and 10 pilots of comedies, and then they would decide what shows they wanted to pick up for the next season. And then creators, like, there's a vast difference in the power that a creator will have. So somebody like Shonda Rhimes has tremendous power because she's made a lot of money for these companies. Whereas if I got a show on the air, the show that I'm hoping something happens with, I would have, very little power other than what I've written in the script. And so I've tried to be as descriptive as possible. And so I describe, Patty, we're going to talk, and I'm going to give you a copy of that script to explain it in more detail. How that's the challenge of the craft of screenwriting. And the scripts that I've given you don't illustrate it as properly as I think it could be illustrated. How you create a character and in 1 or 2 sentences that really tells the reader who that person is. That's the challenge of the craft.
Thanks so much, Sibyl. This has really been interesting. There's so much British TV in America, especially on public TV. Does the system work the same there?
No, it doesn't. We have probably the strongest unions here. There, I'm not exactly sure how it works. A friend of mine's husband was the lawyer for the guy who did Downton Abbey, Julian, what was his last name? Huh? Yes, yes. And he would write every episode, so writers really hate that, you know, because it's like hogging. Like we want, and there's a guy who wrote, oh, the show about the ranch up in Montana with Kevin Costner. My mind's going so.
Yellowstone.
Yeah. He wrote every episode, and um, that I don't know exactly how things work overseas. I know it's very different. A friend of mine who was a writer producer on Law and Order is Canadian, and he also speaks French because he was from Montreal, and so he created a show that was going to be shot in Paris. And it was a completely different thing. Like they, took 2-hour lunch breaks. The crew, they didn't work as hard as American crews who are incredible and work so hard. And the directors of this TV show started bossing him around. And he was like, no, you don't understand. Like, I'm the boss. And it was very different. They tried to steamroll him. And I don't think writers in those other countries have the same kind of rights and all that, even though they're diminishing here. We still have a good union for the most part.
Hello. Do you have a favorite show that, I don't know if you can answer this or not, a favorite show that you worked on or a favorite group of actors on a show that you worked with?
Absolutely, I can totally answer that. Um, I'm still in touch with a lot of those writers, and it was a show that my mentor and friend Nancy Miller created, and we used to call it the best show that no one watched. And it was called Any Day Now. And it was the first drama that Lifetime, when Lifetime television first started, we were the first drama that they did. And it was about, it cut between the 1960s during the civil rights era in Alabama, in Birmingham, Alabama, and present day. And the two actors were Annie Potts and Lorraine Toussaint. And they were two little girls, one black and one white, who had this secret friendship in Birmingham in the 60s, and then their adult selves trying to forge a friendship in the present. And Nancy, there's been so much talk about DEI and, hiring people of different backgrounds and ethnicities. And Nancy Miller did that before anybody, not because she was, coerced into it or shamed into it, but because she wanted different voices. And so I worked on a staff with a lot of Black writers. She hired Black directors and crew members. And the first episode that I wrote of the show, the executive at Lifetime assumed I was a Black writer. And that was such a compliment. Like, I captured a voice that was so different from my own. And we would have arguments and fight about the OJ verdict had come in, and I was like, he's so guilty. And then, it was fascinating. We would beat each other up and then love each other. And we were so proud of the work that we did. Unfortunately, they should have rerun it. It was way ahead of its time. And it was just a brilliant, beautiful show. You would watch episodes and cry. I remember my aunt and uncle who were sitting, like half of you are my family. So my aunt would, call and just compliment it. And I just loved, that was the best job I've ever had in my life. Yeah, I think you can see it on YouTube. It's called Any Day Now. Yeah. Do you have a question?
I did not read your book. I just got invited here a couple of days ago. But tell me about the title, because when I heard it, I thought it would be WRITES.
Okay, well, actually, I don't want to, it's kind of, it might not be appropriate. I lived a lot of different lifetimes, and the current lifetime, who I am as a person and what I value, is very different from the person I was in my 20s. And I was telling a story to some friends one time about some antics that I got into in my 20s. And one of the friends is a Coast Guard captain. And he said, I can't believe that was you. You've got to write your memoir and call it Sibyl Writes, because when a ship writes, it sits upright in the water. So it's kind of like I got my act together. Mhm.
Any other questions? Going once, twice. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, I want to thank you all for being with us. I want to thank Sibyl for sharing. I want to thank the Friends of the Library Foundation for supporting everything we do here at the library. A couple upcoming programs I wanted to let folks know about. On the evening of Saturday, August 30th at the high school auditorium, we will have Boulder author David Barron coming to talk about his book. It's called The Martians. It's about this brief period in the early 20th century when we thought there was life on Mars. So excited about that. Every Monday, the first Monday of the month, we have a monthly writing group where we gather together writers who have written something, all genres, all experience levels. Each writer shares their work. Other folks provide feedback, and we just go around the room. So our next installment of that is on the 8th of September. And I'll be sending out an email to everyone who registered with those links to those programs and also a survey. And we'd love it if you'd fill out that survey. Tell us what you thought of tonight's program. And let's give Sibyl one more hand. And have a great evening, everyone.